Hello, this video tutorial is the first in a series about 12-tone triads, that is, sets of 4 triads that together cover all chromatic pitch classes. I'll discuss the pairwise combination into hexachords and the dissonance properties of polychords. There will be voicing, chord progression and 2 composition examples. In this tutorial I'll discuss the fundamentals of 12-tone triad sets, the combination of such triads into hexachords, and the dissonance aspect of polychords. I'll demonstrate the application of 12-tone polychords in 2 short compositions, a guitar etude and an orchestral suspense cue. Let's start with the fundamentals. I'll introduce sets of 12-tone triads, then the pairwise combination of triads into hexachords. The vertical stacking of triads yields polychords, and we'll classify the chord tension level and discuss voicing aspects. So, what are 12-tone triads? Here's a diagram that illustrates finding sets of 4 triads that cover all 12 pitch classes. For the moment, we'll limit ourselves to the standard triads in thirds, that is, triads that contain minor and/or major thirds, intervals of 3 or 4 semitones. So, we are considering the major, minor, augmented and diminished triad types. Triads will be shown on a 1-octave keyboard, in the pitch class diagram and in staff notation. This episode is limited to one such possible triad set, starting with the C major chord. Let's add 3 new pitches from the G sharp minor chord. The third unit in the set is the D flat augmented triad. And we complete this set with the 4th triad B flat augmented. These 4 triad chord structures, S1 to S4, cover all 12 pitch classes from the chromatic scale. There are 3 regular triad types in this set, a major, a minor and 2 augmented triads. The number of standard triad type combinations that yield a 12-tone set is limited, and we'll study these and the options with so-called modal triads in a series of episodes. Working with a 12-tone triad set, we may write a specific type of dodecaphonic melody that has a somewhat familiar tonal flavor due to the regular triads in the set, and I'll demonstrate that later in my first example composition. However, we'll focus on the harmonic potential of 12-tone triads and now look at the pairwise combination into hexachords. Here's the diagram with our example of 4 chord structures that constitute the 12-tone triad set. From the source material, we create pairwise combinations into hexachords, as shown in symbolic notation on the right. There are 3 options for such pairwise combinations. The first is combining S1 and S2 into the first hexachord and S3 and S4 into the other. The second option is to combine S1 and S3, with the other 2 yielding the second hexachord. Here's the third combination option that yields 2 hexachords that together contain all 12 pitch classes. In order to study hexachord properties, I'll use a different representation of the pairwise combinations. This diagram displays the 4 triad structures at the corner points of 2 perpendicular axes. The arrows indicate pairwise combinations. I'll show the 3 options for creating 2 hexachords, starting with S1 plus S2 versus S3 plus S4. In the diagram I also show the pitch class set prime form label for each hexachord and the corresponding 6-element interval class vector. In orange, find the Hindemith Chord Group number. Here we see hexachords in either group 3 or 4, which is a measure for chord dissonance level, a topic for which we'll take a sidestep. This subsection is a summary of the essentials from a series of earlier video tutorials that discuss chord tension level classification. The diagram shows two tension level classification schemes with, on the left, the proposal by Ulehla, who discerns levels 1 to 9 for up to 6-part chord structures, with the highest tension level at the top. These are chords containing tritone intervals 6i and sharp dissonances in a specific voicing. In my earlier video I demonstrated mapping these 9 levels onto the 6 Hindemith chord groups on the right. We find simple triads in group 1, even-numbered groups contain tritones, and in groups 3 and 4 we also find sharp dissonances, as indicated by the semitone interval class I. That is where the pitch class set labeling comes in handy, as the generic interval class vector shown at the bottom allows easy tension level classification in the two schemes. Vector elements n1 and n2 show the number of seconds in the chord. We next find the minor and major thirds, while 5i represents the perfect 4th and 5th intervals, and 6i is the tritone interval. And now we return to the 12-tone triad set. For each hexachord combination we may put the corresponding Hindemith chord group label. What we see is, for a hexachord the cardinal number of the pitch class set obviously is 6. All hexachords in our example set have one or more semitone intervals, since n1 is greater than or equal to 1. Most combinations contain a tritone interval, thus n6 is greater than 0. Therefore, these all receive the classification Hg4. In my carefully selected example, we find two hexachords without tritone, and therefore they lie in Hindemith chord group 3. You'll find similar results for the other possible 12-tone triad sets. These are all chord structures with high dissonance level. In this subsection we'll look at polychords, that is the stacking of two triads, for which there are several permutations. Once again, here is our example set of 4 triads in thirds, consisting of 3 triad types that together cover all 12 pitch classes. We also know that there are 3 pairwise combination options into hexachords that allow assigning a pitch class set label and a Hindemith chord group classification. If we consider the first grouping combination, that is S1 plus S2 versus S3 and S4, we have 4 possible permutations when stacking the triads and creating 6-part polychords. These permutations are illustrated by the color combinations, and I'll play the 4 options, beginning with S2 above S1 and triad S4 on top of S3. In the second permutation we swap the D-flat and B-flat augmented triads. The third option has the C major triad above the G sharp minor. And finally we see the 2 polychords with S1 over S2 and S3 over S4. Each set of 2 polychords again contains all 12 pitch classes, and it is obvious that we are hearing highly dissonant chord structures. Since we have 3 pairwise combination options and 4 polychord permutations, the total number of options for arranging each 12-tone triad set is 12. Whereas the hexachords allowed Hindemith chord group classification into either Hg3 or Hg4, now for the polychords we may assign a Ulehla chord tension level. In general, the tension level is high and will lie between 6 and 9, depending on the chord voicing. For 12-tone triad sets, a very limited number of polychords, those without a tritone, lie at UTL3. Which brings us to the aspect of polychord voicing and the distribution of the dissonant intervals over the chord structure. I'll demonstrate polychord voicing options for the first pairwise combination option, S1 plus S2 versus S3 plus S4. This score shows various voicing options for the first permutation with S2 over S1 and S4 over S3. That is, the A-flat minor chord stacked on top of the C major triad and B-flat augmented over D-flat augmented. The first voicing demonstrates the polychords for the lower triad in root position and stacking both triads without pitch overlap. Root position with overlap yields cluster voicing. We may find the lower triad in inverted position. Here, again, a voicing with no overlap. And finally, we see inverted chords with overlap. The last measure also showing open position voicing. We hear highly dissonant polychords, 6-part structures without a tritone, and therefore all in Hindemith group 3. However, the voicings have subtle differences in dissonance perception that may lead to a different classification in the Ulehla scheme. We may control the polychord tension level by inspecting the interval class vector and distribute relevant intervals. A high tension level is determined by the distribution of the sharp dissonances, such as the minor second, major seventh, and especially the minor ninth. These all belong to interval class N1. Writing such intervals as exposed dissonance, not covered by other notes, we get maximum chord tension. We may cover sharp dissonances by inserting the more consonant minor and major thirds, their numbers indicated by N3 and N4. Chord stability is also influenced by the Hindemith root pitch. We find the root by looking for the lowest perfect fifth in the polychord. If the root is in the bass part, there is more stability, less tension than for an inverted chord. Let me demonstrate this aspect using the polychord constructed from S1 and S2, that is C major and G sharp minor. This polychord contains 3 semitone intervals. These have been marked in the score. I'll play 4 example voicings with different vertical stacking using close and open triads, and the 2 stacking permutations S2 over S1 and S1 over S2. The example yields a gradual tension level increase. In the other polychord we stack D-flat and B-flat augmented on top of each other. Again, there are 4 voicings with increasing tension level. The red bars indicate the occurrence of either an exposed or covered major 7th or minor 9th interval. Note that here we are investigating the chord tension differences within the category of already highly dissonant polychords. This is a subtle effect, and it is far easier to control and create tension patterns in a chord progression by not only using polychords and changing the chord type, as I've shown in my earlier videos. Finally, note that we are voicing a polychord, not just the 6 pitches in the hexachord. We must retain the idea of 2 stacked triads with a lower and upper structure. In this section I'll present 2 chord progressions with polychords only and apply these to short example compositions. We return to our example 12-tone triad set, but this time transposed upper major second to the tonic D. The polychord continuity is created by successively using all 3 possible pairwise triad combinations. After each combination, I transpose the set using the property that this specific set contains 2 augmented triads as S3 and S4. These can be used as common chords between 2 transpositions. This is just one possible approach to the creation of a chord progression that yields a certain degree of tonal stability in a 12-tone context. I write a 6-part voicing and afterwards calculate the Hindemith root and the root movement in Schillinger chromatic root cycles. Here's the chord progression that I'll use in a short composition, an etude for guitar. We recognize the 4 basic triads. In the polychord continuity, all 3 pairing combinations are used. The pitch class set labels indicate a natural rise in chord tension. The number of dissonant seconds increases from 3 to 4 to 5, while the number of tritones starts at 0 to increase to 2 in the last 2 polychords. When connecting the polychords, note how S4 becomes S3 in the next pair, giving me the tonic of the new set, and 3 overlapping pitches as sustained notes. After determining the chord root by finding the lowest perfect fifth in the structure, I write the Schillinger root movements, here a number of positive leaps and steps, with the number of semitones shown. In the voicing and voice leading, note close versus open position, stepwise motion versus leaps, contrary motion between outer parts, up to an apex pitch just before the closing. The dominant pedal A is not part of the polychord, but helps in creating a cadential feeling when arriving at the simple tonic triad D. This is an example of when I decide not to apply these techniques too rigidly and instead prefer to change to a different texture that better supports my musical idea and the effect I want to achieve. Let's play this polychord progression. Composition example 1 demonstrates a more melodic application of 12-tone triads. We use the polychord continuity on tonic D to create a short piece with ternary form. It is in 4/4 time signature, tempo 200 beats per minute and 34 measures long. It is a kind of guitar etude. Read along with the annotated score. We return to the original tonic C and 4 triad set. Again, in the polychord continuity, all pairwise combinations will be used. I used set transposition with maximum sustained pitches, based on the 2 augmented triads in the set. After writing the 6-part voicing, I determined the chord root and root movement. In the score, I've marked the 4 triad structures, the 3 pairwise combinations into hexachords, and the triad stacking in the polychords, the pitch class set labels and interval vectors. This time the highest tension level polychords are in the center of the progression. The tonic changes from C to A to F sharp when transposing the sets and using the S4 becomes S3 property. Inspecting roots and root movements, this time there are a number of negative chromatic root cycles. This progression lacks cadential feeling. In the voice leading we find mostly stepwise motion. All but 1 chords are in close position voicing, and note the motion direction in the outer voices. Listen to this polychord continuity. In the second composition example, there is a harmonic application of the 12-tone triads. This polychord continuity starts on tonic C, the time signature is 3/4. This is an almost 2 minutes long orchestral suspense cue. with instrumental forms such as arpeggio triplet patterns and descending motifs, pedal point and block chords. Read along with the annotated condensed score. In this video tutorial, I discussed the existence of 12-tone triad sets. Throughout the video, I used a single such set with traditional triads in thirds. Combination of two triads yields three options for generating pairs of hexachords, for which we may identify the pitch class set label and the Hindemith Chord Group classification. Stacking two triads on top of each other yields polychords. There are 4 possible permutations for each polychord pair. The 6-part voicing will yield a corresponding Ulehla Tension Level classification. And now comes the application aspect. I've demonstrated an approach for generating a polychord continuity and how to achieve some tension level control within the already highly dissonant 12-tone polychord idiom by careful distribution of the sharp dissonant intervals. I will admit that I perceive these tension level variations as minimal, and there are certainly less contrived techniques for creating harmonic tension curves. However, this tutorial shows the fundamentals and presents tools for analysis and control. Hopefully my 2 example compositions convince you of the musical applicability of a 12-tone polychord continuity. Further episodes will look at all regular 12-tone triad sets with chords in thirds, and then at modal triad sets that contain the interval of the second. In the meantime, I encourage you to experiment and to discover the potential of this technique. If you have not done so yet, please subscribe to my channel. If you find this tutorial useful, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to share this video. I do welcome support for my tutorial production efforts. To that end, there is a PayPal donation link in the description below. Visit my website for more content and ebooks in the webshop. Thanks for watching.